preferably alcoholic, preferably wine, number one. And then if you don't have wine, you can use beer, vodka, whiskey, something that, the key is that it's something that would be served to a dignitary who comes to visit, or you're escorting, in this case, you're escorting them out. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, when push comes to shove, though, for Havdalah, there's even a tradition that you can serve a drink which is not alcoholic. Classic example of which is someone, a guest comes over. Nowadays, you'd serve them a cup of coffee, right? Somebody comes over to your house, you offer them a cup of coffee. It's a very dignified, or a cup of tea even. So it's true, it's not alcoholic, but it is, if you don't have those other options, it is kosher for Havdalah to make kiddush, or to make Havdalah, excuse me, on a cup of coffee. I take it with milk and sugar, but not crazy. You've seen that. You've seen that done. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The logic is cogent. The logic makes sense. In any case, let's move on. We're up to chapter 7 now. Chapter 7 is the laws of the Shabbat meals. Again, we're focusing on the positive mitzvot of Shabbat first, before we get to the definitions of the prohibitions. Chapter 7 and 8 is what we have left as the positive, and then we'll get into, hopefully we'll cover this today. Okay, page 115. Everybody got it? All right, Yosef, how are you feeling today?
Nice.
Nice, great. So give us some nice reading, will you?
Absolutely.
Great.
The mitzvah of Shabbat.
Psh, one second. Oh, yeah. Welcome back to Hananel. So nice to see you. Shh, our hero, back from the front lines. Wow, good to see you. It's good to see you smiling also. Baruch Hashem. Life goes on. Am Yisrael Chai, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What a crazy thing to live through. Bezrat Hashem is the last of the experiences with close calls with terrorists and all those sorts of rockets and those. We should have only peace and quiet and victory for the Jewish people, with no harm to anybody around us or anybody on our side, at least. Okay? So welcome back. We're just about to start chapter 7. It's just so happy to see you walk in, so we wanted to welcome you. Okay, go ahead, Yosef. Thank you.
Mitzvah of Shabbat, festive Shabbat. The sages say one who eats the 3 festive meals on Shabbat is prepared from 3 misfortunes, spared from 3 misfortunes. The birth pangs of Messiah, and the nation to hell, and Armageddon, Shabbat 18.
Well, the truth is, some people are telling me that, with America sending over this aircraft carrier, somebody said something about China sending over an aircraft carrier. We know that there's all the nations in the East in high gear, and all over. People are saying, well, this is looking awfully like an international war on Jerusalem. Armageddon, some people call it. And that's right. Right. We talked about it. Right. Right. Exactly. So there's all sorts of biblical connotations to this type of war, with the horrible types of vicious, monstrous deeds. So sometimes these are called the birth pangs of Messiah. Birth pangs is when a woman is having contractions. Apparently, it's very high on the scale of pain. All of us here are men, but when they try to make these types of scales of painful things, a friend the other day had a big chunk of skin torn off by some heavy machinery by accident, and luckily it was no permanent damage, but that kills. That really is painful. Apparently, birth is pretty high up there on the level of pain. So, we've had some painful experiences, but our tradition tells us that sometimes these are birth pangs. That it's something that we go through to give birth to something better. Like a baby comes out at the end of the horrible pain that a birthing mother has to go through. So we hope that these are birth pangs of the Messiah, that the Messiah will come after these difficult misfortunes. And
it's a really good song as well.
It's a good song?
It's a really good song.
Which one? Chavilei Mashiach. Yeah, good. The thing is, wait a minute. Have you been careful about having 3 meals on Shabbat?
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
Have you? You have 3 meals on Shabbat? 3 meals on Shabbat? 3 meals on Shabbat? I don't understand. One who eats the 3 festive meals on Shabbat is spared from these misfortunes. Ah.
I want a refund.
Exactly. Something's not working here. I guess maybe it doesn't refer to me only me and you. And I could get better about it. I wasn't always so careful about the 3 festive meals. Sudash Lishit, sometimes we cut some corners. We're going to learn about those corners, and when push comes to shove, they're allowed. But ultimately, when these kind of statements are made, first of all, the sages are trying to spur us to be more careful about the laws, not necessarily giving us a prescription, 1-to-1. If you don't do this, this will happen. We're a little bit sated with those kind of predictions. And we don't really know exactly how and when God brings misfortune upon who. But the sages are giving us a message that this is very important. And maybe there's an intrinsic connection between eating the 3 meals and having these specifically 3 misfortunes, which have to do with the future punishments and so forth. And the last thing I want to say is that, of course, sages are not speaking about an individual. They're speaking about the Jewish people as a whole. Right? All these are national scale, except for hell in the middle, which is perhaps an individual punishment. The other ones are national scale considerations and calculations. And let's look at the Jewish people on the national scale. Is everybody having 3 meals? Is even the majority of the Jewish people keeping 3 Shabbat meals? Unfortunately, for the last 200 years, since the last 200 years, less and less Jews are educated about their heritage. Most Jews today don't even know that there's a mitzvah to have 3 Shabbat meals. So we have to get there. We have to reconnect our people to our heritage, to the mitzvah of Shabbat, most beautiful mitzvah. We experience it. We're trying to get closer to it, to fulfill all of its laws and all of its beauty. But we have to make sure that our neighbors and friends and relatives and all of the Jewish people appreciate Shabbat more than just a day for soccer or for family time is good. A lot of Israeli secular Jews have a family meal on Friday night, so that's 1 out of 3. So we have a place to start with. It's a good start, and more and more, I think, in recent years, you've heard about. It's become more popular even in the wider culture. People are learning about cholent. People are having cholent on Thursday nights, not so much on Shabbat mornings. But it's expanding this awareness that we have a national dish for Shabbat morning. Who knows? And the 3rd meal, well, we still have to work on that one. That's the 4th.
They don't even want to see food anymore.
That's a specific challenge. But in any case, this is part of the mitzvot of Shabbat, the mitzvah of keeping Shabbat in a positive way. We make Kiddush, we said, special prayers, we said, learning Torah, we said. Now we're up to the meals. The meals, it's very strange. Don't think you just have to eat like every other day. You eat your meal, you eat your food. We all eat every day. That's the way it's human condition. We don't eat good nutrition. we don't function well. We can't serve Hashem. So of course eating is part of our daily routine. On Shabbat, it turns into a mitzvah. Specifically, it turns into, as we're going to see, the meals are not just because of you're trying to get in your calories and your nutritional value. The meal itself is a form of worship. Amazing concept. Many monasteries or all sorts of retreats where they're trying to get spiritual. They eat little, very little, as little as possible. They feel that maybe the food will get in the way of your spiritual life. This mitzvah tells us the exact opposite. Maybe it's only on Shabbat. But there is this concept that you can have, and you must have, worship through your meals. We even eat more on Shabbat than during the week. 3 meals during the week. Standard was, in the ancient times, 2 meals a day. I know, in America, I grew up, you have to have 3 solid more meals. Breakfast, the champions. Lunch and dinner. But on Shabbat, the sages say, more than the 2 meals which are standard, that you have to make sure to have 3 meals for the sake of worship. Let's see how that works. Okay, Yosef, you read the first line so beautifully, and then I so rudely interrupted you twice. But now I'll try to be quiet and let you read. Go ahead.
The sages also state whoever delights in Shabbat is spared from imperial subjugation. Informing these statements is the idea that without Shabbat we would become totally subjugated to the material burden of this world. We would work non-stop in order to sustain our bodies and provide them with pleasure. We would forget our divine souls and find it difficult to elevate ourselves toward divine ideals. Our spiritual inclinations would be suppressed in silence, and we would consequently sink into all the world's faults and perversions, which are the cause of all calamity. But when one privileged to connect to Shabbat with all his being, spiritual and material, through Torah, study, and prayer as well as rest and pleasure, he transcends the world's flaws and reaches the eternally good world. Thus, he who is automatically saved from the calamities of this world. The coarse material world is full of barriers that prevents the divine light from being revealed and the soul from actualizing itself. But one who enjoys Shabbat through Torah, prayer, and good food connects his body with its spiritual roots. The physical becomes a vehicle of expression for the soul and for the sanctity of Shabbat. Then the limitations and impediments of the material world cease to exist, and the heart is made. This fulfills the word of the sages. Whoever enjoys Shabbat is given everything his heart desires. Shabbat. By cleaning our houses and eating festive meals in honor of Shabbat, we link the material world to its spiritual roots and draw down blessings upon it. This is the meaning of the statement of the sages, one who honors Shabbat merits well. Shabbat 198. They similarly state whoever makes Shabbat enjoyable receives boundless territory. As the biblical text states, if you refrain from trampling the Shabbat, from pursuing your affairs on my holy day, if you call Shabbat delight, Hashem's holy day honored, then you will seek Hashem's delight. I will set you astride the heights of the earth, and let you enjoy the heritage of your father Yaakov, where the mouth of Hashem is spoken. Yaakov's heritage is boundless.
So if you want to be successful in conquering Gaza, back from the murderous terrorists, we should keep Shabbat. We get a heritage of Nachala, is the Hebrew for that. Nachala has a connotation of actual physical land. So the sages promise lots of good things for those who keep Shabbat. And the promises Rav Melamed is trying to point out to us, they all have the connotation of connecting the physical riches, the wealth of the material world, with Hashem and with our spiritual well-being, our spiritual strivings. And so there's definitely a very this-worldly emphasis in Judaism, which is perhaps unique compared to other religions. Okay? Stephen, how you doing today? Baruch Hashem, everything's all right? Kids are back in school, I understand. Yeah. All over Jerusalem, I think kids are back in school. Wow, it's a big relief. I hope everybody stays safe and everybody's successful. And we have a successful time. Okay, can you read the next paragraph for us, Stephen? We're on page 116 at first glance.
At first glance, seems very easy to enjoy Shabbat with good food. Why then did the sages talk at such length about the great reward for doing this? Doesn't everyone like to eat and enjoy? What must be kept in mind is that the mitzvah is to take pleasure in Shabbat, not in the plate or the gut. In other words, we must enjoy the meal while recognizing that they serve to express the sanctity of Shabbat. The meal should leave one with a greater desire to learn more Torah and do more mitzvot. If one is privileged to enjoy Shabbat, enjoying the pleasure of the body with the exaltation of the soul, he merits holiness and blessing both in the world and in the world to come. Though Shabbat and Yom Tov are similar, there is also a difference between them. The mitzvah of Shabbat is oneg, pleasure, delight, while the mitzvah of Yom Tov is simcha, joy. The difference is that simcha is conspicuous and visible to others. Thus, it is a mitzvah on Yom Tov to eat meat and drink more wine than usual. However, oneg is more internal, subtle, and refined. Thus, the mitzvah of eating on Shabbat is also more refined. One who does not really enjoy eating meat and wine can enjoy other food instead. Perhaps this is why fish is a typical Shabbat food. It tastes and refined and subtle.
Okay, so this is the concept of the Shabbat meals. As I said, it's part of our mitzvah on Shabbat. We already mentioned before that we have 2 loaves of bread. We'll see how that plays up with all 3 meals. But let's continue and get into some of the details, okay? Yisrael, you read for us a little bit?
I have some questions.
Sure, yeah.
How to say a meal? Because sometimes in the morning is too much, and other meal, the first meal is don't want it too much.
Exactly.
Just how much is okay or?
That's a great question. That's exactly what we're going to talk about right now. Okay, so let's learn, and we'll see exactly how you define what a meal is. What's the smallest meal? What's the biggest meal? Well, biggest meal. It's just like during the week, you shouldn't overeat. Never, be like a glutton, and you shouldn't get drunk so that you can't do your worship of Hashem. So there is too much. But what's the minimum amount? What qualifies as a Shabbat meal? Let's see. Go ahead. So Yisrael, you read a little, please. Yeah.
There are 2 methods changing to the Shabbat meal. One is
Oneg. Oneg is a Hebrew word. Yeah. Delight.
And the method to be delight in Shabbat, it is right called Shabbat delight only.
Right. That's from Yeshayahu, right? 58.
Only is the fulfilled hermery food the meals, but the next and then the Sabbath are parts of this as well. The second method is to the partakes of the 3 meals. The sauce is the it and in various words.
Okay, thank you. So you see that he says there is a general mitzvah to delight, have oneg, to enjoy oneself, and that's why many times after the meal, what do we have in Machon Meir? After the Friday night meal, what do we call it? When you gather around, you have some cake and cookies and Torah. Oneg Shabbat. It's the general mitzvah of oneg Shabbat, even outside of the meals. And then there's the specific meals which are mandated, and that is learned out from, as we turn the page, that is learned out from the pasuk. He doesn't actually quote the verse. If you see it in the bottom in the footnote, about 5 lines from the end of page 117, the word day appears 3 times. Then Moses said, eat it today, for today is the Shabbat of the Lord. You will not find it today on the plain. About the man, it says 3 times in one verse, or 2 verses, it says, describing the man, that the word today, and so the sages have a hint there that you have to have 3 meals on Shabbat. So there are 3 structured meals. Well, what constitutes a meal? Let's see. Turn the page. Hananel, can you read for us? Top of page 118, please.
Okay. The first meal is held on Friday night, the second on the Shabbat morning before midday, and the third on Shabbat afternoon from half seasonal hours after midday until Shkia.
Who can tell me what Shkia means?
Sunset.
Sundown, sunset, right. Good. Go ahead.
If one eat the third meal prior to this, he has not fulfilled his obligation. One who did not eat dinner on Friday night should eat 3 meals on Shabbat day. If one was unable to eat the second meal before the midday, he should eat 2 meals afterward. For some maintain that the timing of the meals is not critical, and one may reply upon them.
I don't know if you remember, recently we had a situation where we had 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, which were Shabbat, and then the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And the question became, what do we do with Seudah Shlishit on Shabbat? Because it's right before, if you do it in the afternoon, it's right before the next day Yom Tov, and you're supposed to be hungry for the meal in the evening. So if you have Seudah Shlishit in the late afternoon, you won't be hungry for the evening meal, which is also a mitzvah. It's a Yom Tov, second day Yom Tov. So some people said, so we do it earlier. We do it even in the morning. So we rely on those opinions that the timing is not critical. The idea that you have to have 3 meals is pretty clear. But if you don't have them at the proper time, right, Friday night, and then Shabbat morning, and then Shabbat afternoon, you can play around with it and make it up and make sure that you have 3 meals throughout the course of the 25 hours. Okay? Gustavo, you'll read for us, please?
Grain is staple of the meal because it is the most important food. It is a mitzvah to prepare other good foods that people delight in. In the time of the sages, people enjoyed a dish made of spinach, large fish, and heads of garlic. So it was a mitzvah to prepare this for Shabbat. Since most people enjoy meat, wine, and delicacies, meaning tasty fruits, posting right that we should have plenty of them. Posting right that we should have plenty of them. One who does not enjoy meat and wine should prepare foods he does enjoy for Shabbat. Continue?
Yep, please.
The Aharonim right, based on Kabbalah, that there is a mitzvah to eat fish at each of the 3 meals. Several reasons are given for this. Fishes symbolizes blessing. They hint at deep matters since they are creatures of the deep. And Ain Hara, the evil eye, has no power over them. However, one who does not enjoy fish is not required to eat it.
I often say that I'm a very, very little Kabbalist. Because I don't like fish. I don't eat fish on Shabbat because I don't enjoy fish. But that's my own personal thing. My wife suffers with me sometimes. She makes for herself fish sometimes. But this is not an obligation, but there is a concept that fish for Shabbat is we already told stories about Hillel and Shammai shopping for their fish for Shabbat, also for their meat for Shabbat. But okay, this is a theme. Okay, Gershon, will you read for this? Even though?
Okay, even though eating sparingly is generally a positive character trait, on Shabbat it is a mitzvah to eat heartily. It is not considered gluttonous since it is for a mitzvah. Shabbat 117b, Shalom 274, Mishnah verse 6. However, one should not overeat, because overeating leads to exhaustion and depression. As for those who stuff themselves, fill up, and become tired and fall asleep, and do not study Torah, they do not get any credit for the mitzvah. They are not making Shabbat enjoyable, they are only pleasing their goals. According to the Shalom, Masechet Shabbat, Mir Mitzvah.
Okay, we're going to skip ahead now to the second section about the Lechem Mishnah. So it's a mitzvah to have meals, but not to be a glutton, obviously. Enjoy yourself. Go ahead.
Okay.
Number 3 on page 119.
2 loaves and cutting the bread. There's a mitzvah to use 2 loaves of bread on Shabbat to commemorate the double portion of manna that fell on Fridays when Jews were in the desert, and that was referred to as Lechem Mishnah, according to Shabbat 117b. Actually, there are many double aspects to Shabbat. Its mitzvah are twofold, Zachor and Shavor. Its sacrifices are double, 2 perfect lambs. Its punishment is double, and so is its reward. The bread that we use is doubled to express the day as doubly great, based on an Alpha Shimoni and Mishnah. The person breaking bread should hold both of the challahs in his hand while reciting the Beracha, but it is sufficient if he only cuts one. By holding both challah during the Beracha, he has already fulfilled the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah. Rabbi, Rashi, Shalom 274:1.
Okay, we're going to skip a little. This is there's a lot of detail here about how precisely to cut the challah, with a bigger piece, the central piece, how do you give it, distribute it amongst to the people. A lot of people get confused with it, and because the trick is as follows. Let me just explain to it outside. We won't read it all inside for lack of time. But the idea is that ideally, when you make a bracha, you should make a bracha on something which is a whole unit. Like we eat an apple. It's much nicer to make a bracha on a whole apple than a cut apple, an apple that's cut in half. If you have 2 choices, a cut apple or a whole apple, it's better to make a bracha on the whole apple. Same thing with bread. It's better to make a bracha on a whole piece of bread. And especially on Shabbat, you have 2 whole loaves of bread. Right? So we're going to make the bracha before we cut the bread. So once it's cut, it won't be whole anymore. Right? So we make the bracha before we cut it. Okay, so then once we make the bracha, so then we cut it. But many times we eat together a meal on Shabbat, and there's like 10 people around the table. Let's say here, we're 10 people, Baruch Hashem. So I make the bracha on behalf of everybody. Everybody answers amen. You don't have to say your own bracha again when you get your piece. But there's a delay, because I've got to cut now. I've got to slice it and distribute it. Put salt. There's a custom that we dip the bread into salt, just like the korbanot in the temple where it had to be dipped in salt. There's a pasuk in the Torah about all the sacrifices have to be dipped in salt. And our table is reminiscent of it. It's a worship. It's a table of worship. So we dip the bread into the salt too. So we have to have 10 pieces dipped in salt, cut, 10 distributed. Takes a while. All that time, everybody has to be silent, because you're not allowed to speak, interrupt between saying the blessing and eating your morsel of bread. So that's a feature of Shabbat meals that people know about. Shh. You're not allowed to talk even before you say the bracha, hamotzi. Why? What have you done before the bracha of hamotzi? Washing the tilat yadayim. We have a concept that we have to wash hands before we eat bread. And then we make a bracha on the washing of the hands. You're not allowed to interrupt and speak about other matters other than getting the bread ready for making the bracha. You're allowed to say, for example, oh, where's the salt? Or I need a knife, because that's related to the matter at hand. But you're not allowed to say, how's the weather? You look a little, I like your dress, whatever it is, right? So so we're not talking there, and then we're not talking after the motzi until we finally get our piece of bread. You're supposed to eat a kazait, size of an olive. Best if you eat a kabetza, size of an egg, which is approximately double the size of an olive. So this is the process of cutting, slicing the. If you don't have two full whole chalot, sometimes you're in the army and they don't have the little. They just buy, or you didn't shop properly, but you have sliced bread. It comes in a plastic bag, it keeps for a couple of days. Better to have two slices. Two, the double is the idea. It's not as good as having two full whole breads, but you do the best you can, and you make the hamotzi on the pre-sliced bread if you have none other available.
Rabbi, how about a pizza? A slice of pizza is specifically kazait?
It's sliced. Is that a kazait? Yeah. Piece of pizza. Apparently, one piece of bread is the size of a kazait.
Is pizza bread.
That's a separate question, but he's asking about the volume. The volume of an olive's worth when it comes to bread, which is baked, it rises, and there's some flour and water. Sometimes there's eggs in there. Usually, the assumption is that one slice of bread has the volume of one olive, and two slices, therefore, would be enough for the volume of an egg. Okay?
For example, if I have only one bread, can I slide it down and then put it in this?
You could, but I think that would be the wrong thing. It's better to have a whole bread.
If I can, for example, in the non.
You're by yourself. You only have one loaf of bread. I would not slice it. I would not cut it and have two, because it's better to make the bracha on a whole loaf. By the second meal, you already have two loaves for sure. You have two parts. But for the first time, it's if you don't have two, you don't have. But that's a good question though, because there's two principles. One is we're supposed to have two, we're supposed to have something double. On the other hand, we're supposed to make the bracha on something whole. So it's a tricky question you're asking. I think the answer is like I said. It's better to make the bracha on something whole, even on Shabbat, if you only have one. But it's.
Invest in a bag of pizza for 10 shekel.
Right, many people have in their fridge. What we have in our house is that sometimes we have our beautiful chalot, which are braided, and sometimes my wife makes chalot. This last few weeks, she's been making chalot and distributing them to the soldiers in our neighborhood. And last Shabbat, she had a world record for our house. She made a dough with 5 kilos of flour. So that was like, I could send you a picture. It's like this big pot of overflowing dough. It was really nice. But sometimes we only have one or two chalot, and we're only two people at home, so we don't need to have so many chalot. But what about the lechem mishnah? For the first meal, we have two chalot. Second meal, there's only one left. We're going to eat that one, and we ate one from Friday night, but the second one is going to be for the next day. But we want to make the bracha on two. So we have in the freezer a package of pitot. Any bread which is whole is kosher for lechem mishnah. You can have a roll, a pita, anything, any shape or form of a whole loaf of bread is kosher for making the bracha on two, making the double bracha. So that's a good question. Yeah.
You cut or slice.
What's the difference between cutting and slicing?
One you take with a hand.
Cutting is with your hands. You're saying, yeah.
The another
It's
cutting
good.
is a knife.
I see.
With the knife.
Okay.
And then another one with the hand.
I see. Well, we understand what you're asking. I'm not sure the language is precise enough.
I don't know.
But my grandmother would always say that the Jews should slice with a knife. Jews should cut their bread with a knife. She was an old European grandmother, and in those days it was very clear. It was like the civilized against the uncivilized. She said, Goyim tear the bread. Jews slice their bread. So she was very against it when my father, myself, whoever wanted to just, tear off a piece of bread and, tear it off and distribute it. This was her upbringing. Although halachically, I don't see that it's necessary. It's a cultural thing, I think, of what's considered refined behavior. I mean, in the ancient world, people didn't have knives and forks at their meals. They used their hands to eat the food. So for sure, eating the bread, they would use their hands. There is another trick, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. Because of the delay, we want to minimize the delay between making the bracha and actually eating the piece of bread. Like usually we say a bar priya eats, and we take a bite right away. There's no delay. But sometimes, here, like we said, it takes a while to distribute, to cut, to slice, to distribute. So there is another idea. Some people say, well, in order to minimize the delay, before you make the bracha on the challah, take your knife and make a mark, a slit, a very minor, small mark, so that you won't have to, after you make the bracha, you pick up your knife and you'll start to debate. Should I cut here? Or should I cut there? Should I cut on the right side, on the left side, this side, that? You already have pre-decided where you're going to cut. It saves a fraction of a second during that delay. And so it's a custom. Many people, they slice the challah before they make the bracha. You have to be careful. If you slice it too deeply, and they're not whole anymore, you want to have the whole bread, not a sliced bread. That's the whole point. People get, confused. There's different customs about how deep that slice is. And I've realized that I really don't take any time deciding where to cut the bread. So I don't make any pre-slice. I just try to quickly cut the bread without any delays. You don't have to go crazy, but the point is to minimize the delay. I've seen people that they make the pre-slice and they're careful not to make it too deep because that'll ruin the wholeness. And then after the bracha, they take the time to find where was the slice that they made. So it takes even more time. So, you're defeating the purpose. So, there's a lot. It's a beautiful ritual, and everybody's, it gives it a lot of gravitas to the moment of eating the challah for the Shabbat meal. But, you could get...
Arizal, Rabbi? The Arizal custom?
No, I don't think this is based on the Arizal. This goes back to the Talmud idea of two breads commemorating the man.
What about after the bracha?
The Arizal had a custom you should have 12 breads. Have you heard of that? Have you seen people that have 12 chalot?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I don't think about the cutting.
There's I've seen a custom of, they slice it in front, and then after the bracha, and they select the edge of the challah.
That makes no sense. That doesn't make sense. Right? The whole point of pre-slicing is that's where you're going to cut the bread. There is a concept that you should cut the bread at the highest point. Right? If it's a challah that has, because that's the highest, most prominent, most beautiful part, and so you're honoring the Shabbat by taking the choicest parts of the challah. But again, these are fine details that I can't do that with the knife I use. Zet Hashem, you'll see the knife I use on Shabbat. It can't cut in the middle. It sort of has an edge to it. It's a tricky. It's a cool Native American knife, which has a border on it. So I can't cut in the middle of the challah. I don't. But anyways, you have to see the big picture to know that each one of these specific practices are part of. There's a few principles fighting against each other. On the one hand, you want it to be the middle. On the one hand, you want to make a slice, but you don't want to make a slice. You want to be quicker, and in any case, going back to your question, I think that it's a cultural thing, and if you want to use your hand, sometimes when it's just me and my wife, we just have a small roll, and we just cut it with our hands. We don't have to use a knife. I think.
I go around
Many homes, yeah. And what do you see? Different customs. Yeah.
One with the hands, with the knife.
Right. I think there is a custom. You were saying Arizal. Maybe there's a Kabbalistic idea that you want to handle the challah. The challah are you being used for a mitzvah? So it's a mitzvah object. So You want to treat it with more respect with your hands. You want to actually touch it like you hold the lulav and etrog with your hands. It's something tangible. And so maybe that's an idea that people want to specifically cut it with their hand, not with a knife. I don't know. There's also a concept that
Some people chew the piece.
yeah, this I've seen also. There's so many customs. There's so many customs. It's a beautiful, rich religion, and it's hard to get everything weighed and measured in the big picture. What's the best custom? If you have a family tradition, that's one thing. If you don't, you choose your rabbi and he'll guide you. Yeah, so in most places, usually the halacha says you're not allowed to throw bread.
No.
You shouldn't throw bread. It's not respectful. Although, why do they do that here? Because they're trying to distribute it as quickly as possible. So there should be a separation between the bracha and the eating. So you have competing values here of the speed versus the disrespect. Again, I think in other cultures, it's less disrespectful to throw food. So you have to be sensitive to the different cultures. In any case, it's fun. It's fun. It's fun to see. You go to different homes, you see how everybody does it a little differently, and it's all kosher. So you don't have to go correcting everybody. You're saying that this is better or that. Touching the bread with your hands might be a Kabbalistic idea. Yeah.
Now, can I pass, for example, you did the Menachem, and then can I pass it through and give it to him, or just give it to him?
There's no problem giving it to your hand. The problem is that after Netilat Yadayim, everybody did Netilat Yadayim because they're going to eat bread, right?
Most of most of us don't give directly to.
So let me answer.
They just
Let me answer. There is a principle that after you wash your hands are pure. They're clean. Now, if you touch someone else's hands, maybe they didn't do Netilat Yadayim, or maybe their hands are still wet, or your hands are still wet. There's a lot of complicated laws based on the rules of purity, because this is an ancient remnant of the laws of purity, and so there is this idea that you should not touch other people's hands before you have the bread. In between the Netilat Yadayim and having the bread. Maybe that's why people don't want to hand it from hand to hand, because maybe you'll touch the fingers. And that's violating the laws of Netilat Yadayim. It's not about the bread. Yeah, another reason?
It's considered as if you're taking tzedakah from somebody. That if you're the receiver and someone's putting in your hand, since
we want to be givers, not
it's
takers.
like
Yeah.
you want to be givers, not takers. And
Nice.
you put your hand out and receive. It's like saying it's one of those paranoias that you'll become a taker and need tzedakah and help.
Yeah, every ritual is important and beautiful ideas associated. Sometimes if we have a number of guests, my wife says the cultural thing is to have a basket. I fill up the basket with all the different pieces. We hand out the basket. Nobody has to touch the bread. People are careful. You touched my bread. Like we said about the Kiddush cup, nobody wants to drink from the same thing. So there's people that are more careful about the hygiene, and that's good. That's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with being careful about the germs. So if you can pass it around in a more polite way, why not? It's fine. Yeah.
Just a question. Why you came to take 2 pieces?
I don't know that there's any prohibition. I don't know that you're not allowed to take 2 pieces. As long as there's enough for everybody. Usually you go around and then you can take more afterwards, but if you're hungry, you can have 100 pieces.
No. The first time they passed by,
yes,
you cannot take 2 pieces, you take 1 piece. Then you can take many.
The idea, I think, is that we want to make sure that everybody gets their bread to eat as soon as possible. So if you take 2, then maybe the next guy won't get, and he'll have to wait longer till you cut more. So first let everybody get 1 piece, and then there's enough, and then you cut more. Okay. Good. Section 4, page 120. We're up to Shmuel. Please, will you read for us?
The importance of the Shabbat day meal. The daytime meal is more important than the Friday night meal. So the best food should be saved for this second meal. regarding Kiddush, however, Friday night is more important because we are meant to sanctify the day as close as possible to its onset. Is with regard to honoring Shabbat that the daytime takes precedence over the nighttime?
So you can see it's complicated? Wait, on one hand, Shabbat day is more important. On the other hand, well, we want to honor it when it comes in. So that's Friday night. So it's so complicated. Which meal should be bigger? Which one should be the nicer meal? We try to make them both, obviously. Well, yeah, it's hard to calculate. Usually what dictates the menu is the laws of Shabbat, which we're going to learn later about cooking and heating up food on Shabbat. And there's some foods which are harder to heat up on Shabbat, like liquids. So we have the liquids on Friday night, like soup. Usually in the winter, it's nice to have soup in the nighttime in any case. But there's certain foods which are dependent based on that. But it's a toss-up here, because on some aspects, the morning meal is more important. In other ways, the nighttime meal. So you try to have the best foods that are appropriate. You take a look on the top of page 121. He says, what I said is that Friday night people have hot, fresh food, and but they still prefer the foods that are generally served by day, such as cholent and kugel, whose unique flavor results from leaving them on the warming tray for a long time. So we have different tastes which get associated with different foods on Shabbat. So in practice, we try to make both meals very enjoyable and very respectable. And we're going to move on to Suda Shlishit. Suda Shlishit, if you look on page 121, Shmuel, can you read it for us?
Suda Shlishit, if one does not have bread for Suda Shlishit, or finds it difficult to eat bread, in the event he may fulfill his obligation by eating mezonot.
Yisrael, did you catch that? That's an answer to your question. Right? Sometimes, especially when it's, next week, this Shabbat, what time does Shabbat come in?
4:30.
No,
Change the clocks?
next week. This Shabbat is regular, about 5:15, 5:30, right? Skiya is around 6. But the following week, Shabbat's going to come in at around 5 or 4:30, 4:15 in Jerusalem. And it'll also end at around 4:30, 5 o'clock. So by 5 o'clock, you have to have your 2 meals. If you eat the morning meal at around 12, and then you want to have another full meal at around 3, 4 o'clock, it could be very difficult. Sometimes you're not hungry. Sometimes you're full, especially if you have a good cholent or kugel, right? So here he says it black on white. If you find it difficult to eat bread, when b'diavad, maybe you should be smarter and not eat so much at lunch, because you have to leave room for the third meal. But if you didn't, and I can't have more bread now, so you're allowed to have a smaller meal without bread, but you should have mezonot. Mezonot is cake, cracker, something that's based on grain, one of the flours from the 5 grains. Let's read a little more of the laws, and then we'll get the questions, okay? Because he's going to probably answer your question. Okay, Shmuel, go ahead.
Although one may not use mezonot for the first and second meals, when it comes to Suda Shlishit, some maintain that the primary purpose of the meal is to increase one's delight, not to reach
satiety.
So one is not obligated to eat bread specifically. And therefore, one fulfills the obligation with mezonot. If he does not have mezonot either, or cannot eat them, he should eat meat or fish. If one has no meat or fish, he should eat fruit, preferably cooked, since cooked fruit is considered more akin to a proper meal.
Okay, so if you don't have bread, or you don't want to eat bread, and you don't want to eat cake or cookies either, I know some families that they're very lenient about the third meal, and they have coffee and cake, or tea time in the afternoon, and that's good enough. Some people, it says here, if you don't even want to have cake, have a fruit. Anything, basically, which can be designated as the third meal. It's much more lenient. He may not mention it, but there is a well-known group of Jews who have a unique set of customs. You might have heard of them.
Okay.
Chabad. And the Chabad custom is to be very lenient about the third meal. So lenient that many times they fulfill the mitzvah by saying words of Torah. Instead of eating, they don't eat fruit or mezonot or bread, nothing. And this is their custom, but it's not really condoned by the standard halacha. As I said, they have their rabbis, and their custom is to be lenient about the third meal. So much so. But that shouldn't be unless you're a Chabadnik. You should try to have a third meal. We said earlier how somewhat blessings we get by and how important it is to have the 3 meals to honor the Shabbat. Okay, let's skip a little bit now here. It says in the next paragraph, according to the Rambam, one must make a bracha over wine during Suda Shlishit. Is there a third kiddush? Most people don't do that. And some people say he's just saying you should make it, you should have a good, nice meal. But some people, there is a special kiddush. It's in some of the birkonim. You can see it in the sidurim. What's unique is we don't make it before the meal, but inside the meal. We recite the verses that we said before about today, 3 times the word today, about the man, and then you say Bar Pregafen in the middle of the meal. But, I think that's more of a Hasidic custom. Now the timing is critical. Take a look at the second last paragraph. Shmuel, we read, Su'udah Shlishit must begin, page 122, second last paragraph.
Su'udah Shlishit must begin before Shkia. As long as one recited Hamotzi before Shkia and began the meal, he may continue to eat even well after Tzeit. However, if one was not eating bread but mezonot, fruits or vegetables, or if he was drinking, then once Shkia arrives, he must stop. Because these foods do not render this meal this proper meal. Since the time for Havdalah has already arrived, one may not eat or drink.
Okay, it's very interesting, huh? We haven't mentioned this halacha yet, that before you do a mitzvah, any mitzvah, you're not supposed to eat or drink because you might get too engrossed in your food, you might get drunk, and you might miss the mitzvah. And so there's a mitzvah coming up, and that is the mitzvah of Havdalah. So you really shouldn't eat before Havdalah. But if it's a Shabbat meal, then you're allowed to continue the Shabbat. But if you don't make a proper meal by having bread, then you have to keep the law of not eating before Havdalah. And that the critical time is sunset. If the sun has set and you have not yet made your hamotzi, then you're not having a proper Su'udah Shlishit, which is a meal. You cannot continue to eat. If you're just having the coffee and cake or the fruit, you have to have it before sunset. And then when sunset comes, you have to put down the rest of your coffee and the rest of your cake. Don't eat anymore after sunset. The only exception is what allows you to continue to eat all the way up until Mariv time is if you have bread. If you have bread, then the meal can continue far into the night as much as you like, pushing off Mariv, pushing off Havdalah as much as you like. You can continue the meal, keep eating and drinking even after sunset. But that's only if you have bread. Now that's why you'll see a lot of people rushing to, especially on the short days, you have a time limitation. You must start your third meal with bread before Shkia. Next paragraph says, there is some flexibility. Go ahead, Shmuel. Fancy footwork by the halachists.
One who did not manage to begin Su'udah Shlishit before Shkia may start eating up to 13.5 minutes after Shkia.
See that?
And may continue eating well beyond nightfall. But later than that, he should not eat Su'udah Shlishit.
Right, as you can see, we mentioned 13 and a half minutes before as the traditional time for this Bein Hashmashot, the twilight period. Yes?
Is that Shalosh should be at the meal?
Yes, that's the way it was defined. Of course, this is brought by Ramosha Feinstein. Sorry?
I know
That's a different calculation. It's a different calculation. There are some people that calculate it as 18, but 13 is the smallest amount, 13 and a half, and that's many times I've relied on that. Oh, it's after sunset. We didn't wash yet. I got 13 and a half minutes to a buffer. Okay, let's continue the next, the Birkat Hamazon. The Birkat Hamazon. Idan, you want to read about the Birkat Hamazon on Shabbat meals?
Birkat Hamazon. The sages instituted a special passage to be inserted into Birkat Hamazon on Shabbat. Let's say that favor and strengthen us. In it, we ask that our Shabbat rest and our fulfillment of Shabbat mitzvot find favor with Hashem, and that Hashem allows us to keep Shabbat with no sorrow or anguish. Since this is a petition, the sages ordained that it be recited during the third bracha, which is also petitionary. In order to return us to the topic of this bracha, the added prayer ends with a request about Jerusalem and the redemption. We then return to the paragraph of Uvenei Yerushalayim.
Okay, now I want to take a break for a second. Everybody look up. And you should know that Saturday night, we haven't talked about it in class. Hopefully you've noticed in other sessions or that we have made a major change in our prayers since the 7th of Cheshvan, which was Saturday night. And that is that in the prayer, in the blessing for prosperity, for livelihood, one of the 19 blessings in the middle of the Amidah, Ashkenazi custom is during the summertime we say, give us blessings, tein bracha adama, and in the wintertime, once it becomes the rainy season, we must make our prayers relevant, and therefore we must add in a word about asking not just for blessing in general, but we say, v'tein tal umatar livracha. Give us dew and precipitation for a blessing. We have to mention the rains. We have to ask for the rains. And if we don't, the prayer is invalid. So I don't think you have to go back and pray everything since Sunday if you haven't been doing this. But hopefully you've noticed this already and you've changed. Sephardim have a whole nother version of that blessing of prosperity for the wintertime. It's not just adding two words, right? V'tein tal umatal livracha. They have Barech Aleinu, right? Barech Aleinu instead of Barecheinu. It's a whole paragraph, right? And it's really important to know, because if you don't say that blessing, you continue to say the prayer as if it's summertime. It's not valid. You have to go back and repeat the Shemona Esrei. You haven't fulfilled your mitzvah of praying. So you got to be careful about that. Now there is some fancy footwork here. Let's say you forgot to say, I'll use the Ashkenazi version just for convenience sake, but it applies equally to the Sephardic version, okay? So if you forgot to say V'tein tel matar, and then you finish the bracha, you said Baruch Hashem v'Baruch Hashanim. Some people say right there, you can add in the words V'tein tel matar livracha, and then continue with your Shemona Esrei. Some people say you should wait, and then the next station, it's like there's a bus, right? Your prayers are like a bus. It has 19 stops. It's going from bus stop to bus stop. So once you moved on to the next blessing, you're calling, bus driver, wait for me. Does he usually wait for you if he's pulling out of the stop? Usually not. Usually not. But there is an option to take a sticker, a bumper sticker, and slap it on the back of the bus. So even though the bus has left the station already, if you can, before you start the next blessing, say the words V'tein tel matar livracha, you've fulfilled your mitzvah, and it's kosher. It's a kosher blessing. Some people say no, you have to wait till the next station. For this matter, when's the next station that you can pray for rain? In the Amidah, Shema Koleinu, the blessing about for all of our prayers to be heard. You can add in there a prayer for anything, including v'tein tal umatar livracha. And then you continue your Shemona Esrei as normal. If you forgot, both in Barech Aleinu and in Shema Koleinu, and then you're saying Modim, and you say, I didn't add in the words, I didn't change and pray for rain, you go back to Barech Aleinu. You go back to the beginning of the blessing that you messed up on, and you continue from there. You repeat a second time, Barech Aleinu, and Hashiv Shoftenu, and all the other blessings, Yerushalayim, you say it all a second time, because it was invalid the first time. You go back to Baruch Aleinu, and from there you continue your Shemona Esrei. Let's say you forgot the whole time. You finish your Shemona Esrei, you take your 3 steps back. And you say, I didn't make my prayer for rain. That's what I said before. You have to go back to the beginning. You have to start all over again, that 19 blessings. And you, this time, hopefully you'll remember. Okay, that's the law of the Teit al Matar. This week, a lot of people are praying twice because they forget the first time. There's a similar pattern, halachic pattern, right here about the insertion of a prayer regarding Shabbat in Birkat HaMazon. Birkat HaMazon, we say it during the week whenever we have bread. Afterwards, it has usually 4 blessings, 5 sections. On Shabbat, we have a little insertion. We insert a passage, sort of like what we insert V'tein telumata livracha. So every Shabbat, we have to insert a passage which talks about the Shabbat. Ritzei v'achlitzei is how it starts. What happens if you forget? Nope. I'll listen up, and you'll get it straight once and for all. If you totally forget to say the special passage about the Shabbat, your Birkat HaMazon is not valid. You have to go back and repeat the entire thing from the start. Just like a prayer doesn't mention rain in the wintertime is not a valid prayer. A prayer which doesn't mention Shabbat on Shabbat is not a valid Birkat HaMazon. So if you totally forget Ritzei v'Chatzinu, many times this has happened to me. I don't know why, but I wasn't thinking, and I've forgotten the Ritzei. You have to go back, and it's a biblical mitzvah to say the Birkat HaMazon. It has to be relevant. It's a mitzvah to eat the meals on Shabbat with bread. If you don't say the Ritzei afterwards, it's an invalid Birkat HaMazon. You have to repeat it. Just like I said about Barech Aleinu, if you don't say V'tein telamatar, you have to go back and repeat the entire Shemona Esrei. Here too, we said the Birkat HaMazon has a number of stops, right? Another stations. It's like a train going through the stations. So we have 4 blessings. What happens if you... we add the Ritzei in the 3rd blessing. 3rd blessing about Yerushalayim. That's where we add it. Let's say you forgot, and then you completed the 3rd blessing. You said, Boneh Barachamav Yerushalayim, Amen. And then you remembered, I didn't say Ritzei. So here too, we have the bumper sticker option. You can slap on the back of the bus, the Ritzei v'Achlitzenu, not in that language. Actually, the sages were so aware that people may be forgetting this. They said, if that happens, if you've completed your Boneh Barachamav Yerushalayim Amen, and you have not yet started the next bracha, you insert a prayer about the Shabbat right there and then you continue as usual. You don't have to go back to the beginning. But that prayer has a special form. It's not the same Ritzei v'Achlitzenu that you would have said in the middle of the 3rd blessing. It's a special form. It's right here in the next paragraph. Idan, read the next paragraph. One who forgot to recite Ritzei on page 123, the last paragraph.
One forgot to recite Ritzei but remembers before beginning the next bracha, a Tov v'Hamtiv, must add the following prayer. Buchata Hashem,
Elokeinu melech haolam,
who lovingly gave Shabbatot rest to his people Israel to serve as a sign and a covenant. Buchata Hashem, who
Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Amazing. It's a whole new bracha. Mekadesh HaShabbat bracha. You stick it in between the bracha about Yerushalayim and then the rest of the Birkat HaMazon. In some little benchers, you actually have it. They have it underneath a line or with a star, and it says, oh, if you forgot to say Ritzeh and you remember right here, you can say this special blessing. If you forgot and you moved on, go ahead. When then
One
reset.
continues with the Tov V'Hanativ. If he realizes that he forgot, let's say after he had already begun the Tov V'Hanativ, he must repeat Birkat Mazon from the beginning. For the sages required that Shabbat be mentioned in Birkat Mazon. Thus, if he did not mention Shabbat, he did not fulfill his obligation.
Okay, good. Okay, so this pertains to the first two Shabbat meals. If you didn't say Ritzeh, you have to go back. Third meal, you can get a break because you don't actually have to have bread at that meal. You could have mazonot, so you don't repeat the Birkat Hamazon. There's other laws about Yalav Yavo, but it's similar to with that on Rosh Chodesh. You don't actually have to have a meal on Rosh Chodesh, and so you don't repeat the Birkat Hamazon if you forget the Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh. Okay? Yes, please. Questions? Yeah.
Sometimes on Shabbat you collide with Rosh Chodesh or Yom Tov, something like that. You know what I say for the Shabbat first or and then.
Shabbat always comes before the Yom Tov because it's more common. There's a principle in the Talmud that says that which is more regular comes first. So we say the Ritzeh first and then the Yalev Yavo. Yeah, it appears in the Sidurim that way. They usually put the Shabbat first.
I just had a question back. If you forget something in the Shemona Esrei, like Talmud Matar, and you're praying with the Tzibur, can you pick up stuff during the Chazan's repetition, like by saying Amen without interruption?
That's a good question. Originally, the repetition of the Chazan was designed to assist people who can't read or they don't know the prayers well enough, so that somebody in the crowd can listen to the Chazan, answer Amen, and they'll be that way. He'll fulfill his prayers for many moons now, many years. That has not been the common custom, because people can read, people have sidurim, and we try to avoid that. And basically, we consider the prayers to be a personal obligation that you should say yourself. Only in cases of extreme circumstances, somebody who really can't say the prayers himself, do we say, okay, listen to the Chazan, listen to every word, say Amen, you can fulfill your obligation that way. But if you do have the option, and you can say the prayers a second time yourself. That's what you should do. Okay? It's a good thought. Another question, yeah?
Weinberg, here on the Barkat Shanim, where we add the 10 Talab al-Matab al-Ibrahim.
Yes.
In the current Siddur, it talks about December, which was really surprised when we...
Yes, good question. Very good question. This Siddur was designed primarily for Chutz La'aretz. Outside the land of Israel, they adjust it according. It actually says it in there. Right. In the land of Israel, we always start on the Zayin Mar Cheshvan, and outside of Israel, because the seasons change a little differently, we want to make it relevant to the countries in the Western Hemisphere, and so we use an agricultural date, and based on the seasons. That's based on the solar cycle, and that's why we can give it a secular calendar date, December 12th or 13th. Is that what he says, or 13th? Or
6 or the 7th.
I forget what it is in Chutz La'aretz, but it's a calendar date, a secular calendar date. That's when they start saying it in Chutz La'aretz. But in Israel, everybody starts on Zayin Mar Cheshvan. That goes back to Talmudic times. Okay.
So Rabbi, if the person is in another country, as long as outside of Israel, is follow this this.
Yes, yes. Now, obviously, nowadays there's some very interesting questions. What happens if you're in Israel on Zayin Mar Cheshvan and on Chet Mar Cheshvan, and then somehow you got a flight out of Israel, and you go to New York? Some Jews in New York? I think there's still some Jews, and they are not saying V'tein talu matar livracha yet. But you personally, you've already started, because you were in Eretz Yisrael. So it's a complicated situation. But yeah, you continue to say it privately, at least. If you're the chazan, maybe you wouldn't. But some say even then you would, because really it is of the time to say the blessing, the addition, based on the Talmud. In any case, that's complicated. But if you travel during this period, the simple solution is don't leave Israel. At least between the 7th of Mar Cheshvan and the 12th of December. Oh, is it 5th or 6th of December? What did you?
It's the 4th, and if it's a leap year, the 5th.
The 4th or the 5th of December, thanks.
It's the 5th, and there's a leap year is on the 6th.
5th or 6th of December, thank you. Okay, any other questions? Oh, yeah.
And this siddur, the current siddur, I'm just looking in the contents, and I don't see the correction that we need to make on the brachot. You know, if we forget something, I stole Yosef's siddur on the weekend, and I saw there was the correction didn't mention. What is this correction?
For Birkat Hamazon you're talking about? What we just mentioned?
The art scroll siddur.
They don't have it in here?
In the Quran, I don't see.
In the Birkat, give it to me. My baby will find it for you. Find Birkat Hamazon for me. Find Birkat Hamazon, and it'll probably be underneath the line on the next page after the Uvnei Yerushalayim section. But I'll show you. Okay, so far we've done the meals, the rules of the meals. How many meals on Shabbat? 3 meals. The third one can be smaller if necessary. Ideally, you should have 3 meals with bread. It's beautiful. That's such an important mitzvah, even in the wintertime.
You have the art scroll, Steve? The art scroll.
Yeah, this is true.
Maybe even the correction also for the bracha if you forget.
Birkat Hamazon. Look at Birkat Hamazon. He wants to see if they have the special bracha.
It's a separate section in the art scroll. I think it's in the menu, in the contents. But
in any case, here you found it. Thank you. Here's Birkat Hamazon, and you're right. You don't have the corrective in the Birkat Hamazon. The Seder. We'll have to write a letter to the editor and tell him you're missing out an important bracha. It's only they're going to say, "What? What you forget? How could you forget Shabbat in your Birkat Hamazon?" But it's not.
Their office is behind my house.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, if whoever wants to has a bone to pick with the Korean publishers, send it through Gershon. Okay. All right. Onwards. You know what? Everybody knows that there's 3 meals on Shabbat. It says the word today 3 times. Usually on Shabbat, on a weekday, we have 2 meals. On Shabbat, we have 3 meals. This is what the sages instituted to delight in Shabbat. Guess what? There's a 4th meal. 4th meal? This is not part of the standard mitzvah of Suda Shlishit. The sages write, page 124, section 7. It has a name. The 4th meal is called Milaveh Malka. Sages stated it's mitzvah to set the table on Saturday night for the Milaveh Malka, accompanying the queen meal, with which we honor Shabbat at its departure. When one must say goodbye to a dear and beloved guest, whom he does not want to leave, he escorts him a distance in order to spend just a bit more time with him. So too, we must escort Shabbat at its departure. Despite the fact that it is over, we continue to savor and delight in its holiness. On Shabbat, we're blessed with additional holiness in all areas of our life, material and spiritual, as expressed through our prayers and meals. Our goal is to extend the light of Shabbat to the weekdays. Arizal explains that by saying Vihi Noah in Ma'ariv, on Saturday night, we extend the additional spiritual holiness of Shabbat to the weekdays and ask that God's grace rest upon all our endeavors. Through Milaveh Malka, we extend the light of holiness to our eating all week. So the idea is, by having a 4th meal after Shabbat, we're trying to extend that holiness in our eating during the whole week. Now you might have heard this. The next paragraph is a very famous midrash. Right, remember we learned some midrashim how important it is. You're saved from three things if you have 3 meals on Shabbat: the birth pangs of Mashiach, Gehinom, and Armageddon. Right. So what are the blessings for having a fourth meal? It just says if you have a fourth meal, listen to this. How many limbs and sinews do we have in our body? The sages had a very cool calculation. They say 613 mitzvot, because we have 613 parts to our body. 365 negative commandments. And 248 positive commandments. Similarly, we have 365, veins and arteries, and 248 bones and muscles. So we see there's a parallel: positive, negative, 248, 365. Listen to this midrash. There's one more bone that you haven't heard about. It's the 614th bone. There's another bone in our body. Maybe we could call it a mythical bone. You know what it's called? It's called the luz bone. A luz. The luz is a bone in our body, and not exactly sure where it is. Some people say it's actually at the base of the spine.
I've heard it's cute.
Oh, and the base, the top base of the... Anyways, it's more of a mythical bone, but there is some bone, and this bone is critical because after 120 years, you get buried in the ground, your body decomposes. Even the bones, after many, many years, they decompose. There's this one bone that remains forever until the time of the resurrection of the dead. And from that luz bone, each Jew is going to be resurrected from the dead. After the time when Mashiach comes, and there's going to be a resurrection, the luz bone is going to be the where everybody gets up from. The rest of your body gets formed surrounding this luz bone. So it's like an amazing idea. And listen to this. What makes, if you want to have strong muscles, you should drink calcium, right? Have good food and nutrition, so you'll be strong and healthy. What nourishes the luz bone? You want to have a strong luz bone, don't you? You want to make sure you get up for the resurrection of the dead. You don't want to miss it. So what's going to give strength to your luz bone? Our sages say, eating malave malka. Listen, Idan, will you read for us? We have a tradition. It's on page 125, the second paragraph. We have a tradition.
We have a tradition that there is a bone in the human body called the luz. This bone did not benefit when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge. Therefore, even though death was decreed upon mankind as a result of the sin, this bone does not rot. At the time of the resurrection of the dead, each individual's survival will begin from the luz. This bone, we are told, is nourished only by Menachem.
What a beautiful concept. What an idea. What a midrash. Wow. What is that? I mean, you could take it literally and say, I don't know, as I said, I don't know where the bone is. I don't think that there's actually a bone in the body called a luz bone, but it's a... Sorry?
When I was working in archaeology, they're studying a specific bone somewhere around up here that is very well preserved, and a lot of times you don't find any other bones from that remain, but you find this one bone. So
that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
What's that called?
I think it has something to connect with hearing, but
associated with the ear.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. Could be that this idea is based on this a real phenomenon in the natural body, but the idea, I think, is the key for us to think about here. That there's something about the future redemption, about being revived even after death. Or you could have spiritual death. You're going into the mundane world after Shabbat. You're just feeling distant. You're going to be distant from the spirituality of Shabbat. what's going to keep you going, as we said, what's going to extend this holiness into the week? This fourth meal, this Menachem, escorting the queen meal, that will give you the perhaps spiritual stamina, not only for the week, it'll give you your soul spiritual stamina for all time. And you'll be able to get up in future days. Your soul will revive through this meals. Anyways, this is a beautiful reward for those who are careful to eat the fourth meal. Those who are especially devout prepare special food for the Menachem Malka. This Talmud recounts that Rabbi Abau's household was accustomed to slaughter a calf on Saturday night. You just had beautiful, I'm sure Rabbi Abau had good meat on Shabbat too. But so one week his son said, you know what, why don't we just have some leftovers? Why do we have to have a whole new calf for Saturday night? And they tried that, and then a lion came along and devoured the veal that was meant for Saturday night. Thus they gained nothing. The Gemara tells us the story to teach us it's proper to make the extra effort, prepare special food from Menachem Malka rather than just having leftovers. Anyways, there's laws here. You should set a tablecloth and make it, even men and women should also have Menachem Malka. Ideally, you should have bread. But here, of course.
Used to pizzas when I was learning.
Cool. Very nice. Very nice. It's good to have a special fourth meal. But if you don't want to have bread, you can have something else. Of course, it's much more lenient, even than the leniencies of Suda Shlishit. Just like we said for Suda Shlishit, you can be lenient and have any type of food for the fourth meal. You should, if possible, have a meal to honor the Shabbat even after it leaves. Okay? That is completing our series about the meals of Shabbat. Quickly, if we say some words about Havdalah, we'll be able to start on the Malachot tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Tomorrow's already Thursday. It's hard to believe. I think we won't finish all the laws of Havdalah, but we can start. Maybe we'll finish them tomorrow. I think we're going to skip most of these. One important thing to be aware of, if you look on page 137. You've seen how we make Havdalah. We have a cup of wine, we have spices to smell, and we have a candle to look at, and we have, of course, the bracha itself, Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. All this is on Saturday night. And if you look on page 137, that's section 8, chapter 8, section 8. Just as there's a mitzvah to extend the sanctity of Shabbat into Friday, we start early, right? There's a mitzvah to extend it into Saturday night. Therefore, one must be careful not to perform any melacha until several minutes after tzeit. After that, according to Torah law, one may resume melacha, even without making havdalah. But sages enacted that one may only do melacha after reciting havdalah. You have to say the words. Usually we do that in Mariv, in the bracha, batachonein, in the Amidah. Or there's another havdalah. Repeat after me 5 words. Baruch, Hamavdil, Bein, Kodesh, Lecho. 5 words. That's a alternate version of havdalah. After you say one of these havdalah, either saying it in the Mariv prayer or reciting these 5 words, you're allowed to do melacha, you're allowed to turn on your phone. For example, you're allowed to strike a match for the Havdalah. You have to make sure that you say these words beforehand, either in Mariv or regardless by saying these 5 words. Most women who don't say Havdalah, don't say Mariv, they should be taught If they're going to light the match for Havdalah, if they're going to turn on the machines or the whatever they want to do, they should say Baruch HaMavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol. Because of the importance of reciting Havdalah over a cup of wine, the sages prohibited eating and drinking after Shkia until one makes Havdalah. Remember we said that before? If you don't have bread at Sudash Lishit, you can't eat after Shkia. So you're not allowed to eat. Even after Shkia, even after Tzeit Kochavim, Shabbat is out, you're still not allowed to eat or drink until you make Havdalah, the proper Havdalah. Havdalah and a cup of wine. Saying the 5 words won't help you to eat or drink. You have to make the proper Havdalah on the cup of wine. Water is okay. Some say you shouldn't even have water. So, what happens if you don't have any cup of wine? You can't have your Malava Malka. Right? You want to have a 4th meal. You're not allowed to. Until the following morning. Following morning, if you don't have wine, you don't have wine. You can't make Havdalah on a cup of wine. And you can't have the Malava Malka either. You don't. You wait until the next morning. Next morning, you're allowed to eat without Havdalah. If you're going to get a cup of wine on Sunday afternoon, you make the Havdalah on Sunday afternoon. You're allowed to have breakfast though. If you're going to get a cup of wine only on Monday, right? The shipment is coming in of kosher wine on Tuesday. Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, make your Havdalah on Tuesday with a cup of wine. But that's the end. That's the deadline. By Wednesday, we're already getting ready for the next Shabbat. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is the extension of the previous Shabbat, as we said before. But when you do that, you only use a cup of wine. There's no more the candle and spices. That's only for Motzei Shabbat. If Motzei Shabbat passed, you missed out on the mitzvot of the other mitzvot of Havdalah. If you don't have spices, all right, the Seder. So we've now pretty much covered the positive mitzvot. The rest of our discussion of the laws of Shabbat is going to be focusing on the prohibitions. The prohibitions, we said, not only Zachor Yom Shabbat, must you commemorate it, mention it, celebrate it, eat, drink, learn on it, but you also have to guard it, Shamor. You have to guard it, preserve it, not to violate the sanctity of Shabbat. Like most things, sanctity is associated with prohibitions, things that you're prohibited from doing. Like food. You know, there's the Rambam, you see the blue volumes on the top shelf, and the yellow volumes next to it. That's the set of the 14 books of the Mishnah Torah that the Rambam wrote, summarizing all of the Talmud into a code of law. One of the sections, one of his 14 books, is called the Book of Holiness, Kedusha. And what laws are discussed in the Book of Holiness?
Shabbat?
Nope. That's in a section about the holy times. But the Book of Holiness discusses the laws of food and sex. Food and sex are drives which are basic to the human condition, which make us very similar to animals. We all have to eat, and we all have to procreate, and that drive exists. But the Torah commands us to be holy, to separate ourselves from, distinguish ourselves from the animal kingdom. How do we do that? With our food. There's foods that are forbidden to us. We can't just eat any food we want. It has to be kosher. Right? There's non-kosher animals. There's non-kosher fish. There's prohibitions. Same thing with sex. Can't just have sex with anybody you want, at any time you want. There's non-kosher sex. Right? You can't sleep with your sister. You can't sleep with a married woman and a woman who's menstruating. There's so many laws prohibiting. So we see that the prohibitions help us reach holiness. Holiness, many times, is what we refrain from doing. Same thing on Shabbat. The holiness of Shabbat involves us refraining from doing certain things, from certain activities. The Torah defines them as melacha, as we're going to see. Let's see it inside. Page 139. We'll get started already right now. Chapter 9, the principle of melachot. Yosef, go for it.
The Torah commandment. The Torah commandment. Cessation from all melacha. On Shabbat it is a positive commandment, as the Torah states, 6 days you shall do work, but on the 7th day you shall cease. Shemot. One performs melacha on Shabbat not only neglects this positive commandment, but also violates the negative commandment, as it is states, but the 7th day is Shabbat for Hashem. Okay, you shall not do any melacha.
Okay, so what desecrates the holiness of Shabbat? Doing melacha, doing work. Melacha is prohibited, and if you do melacha, you're desecrating the Shabbat. Now, the Torah, regarding many of its laws, it also tells you a punishment. Most of those punishments are not applicable today. We don't have a court of law which has a jurisdiction, right? A Torah court of law which has such a jurisdiction. For sure not for capital punishment. So we don't apply those punishments. But many times we said that it's quite telling. It can give us an indication of how severe the Torah considers these laws by seeing which punishments are ordained for it. So go ahead.
If one was warned by witnesses not to desecrate Shabbat, yet did so anyway, he is subject to the punishment of stoning. If he desecrated Shabbat intentionally but was not warned by witnesses, he is subject to karet, extirpation. Is it written, you shall keep Shabbat, for it is holy for you. Those who profane it shall be put to death. For whoever does melacha on it shall be extirpated, from among his people. If he desecrates Shabbat unintentionally, he is liable to bring a sin offering.
Okay, so this is one of the sacrifices in the temple was somebody who violates a law unintentionally. Can you imagine? Every time you walk in the room, and let's say it's a incandescent light bulb, and you flick on the switch, and you say, "Uh-oh, it's Shabbat. I forgot." In temple times, you'd have to go to the temple and bring a sacrifice. Cost you 1,000 shekels at least. But it was a wonderful thing to be able to get forgiven for your sins by doing this act. We don't have that system anymore. But every violation of Shabbat unintentionally is a serious violation that would have, in temple times, that would have obligated you to bring a sacrifice. The truth is, some people say even nowadays, you're obligated to bring the sacrifices. The fact that there's no temple, okay, you can't do it. But what happens when the temple is going to be rebuilt? There's going to be a long line. If we have to calculate all of the times that we violated the Shabbat unintentionally, it's going to be a lot of animals sacrificed at that time. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But the actual details make it a little more impractical. You have to know precisely that it is Shabbat, and then forget it, and then remember it afterwards. Somebody who never knew it was Shabbat. Talmud says perhaps he has to bring one sacrifice for all of the days that he violated the Shabbat.
We covered this when we leave Shabbat.
Excellent, that's right. So Mishnah is very interesting, fascinating sugya.
But isn't it
Maybe each Shabbat is different. So you have one for each Shabbat. And then in some circumstances, we're going to see on Shabbat, it's not just one prohibition of don't do work. We're going to see here the sages divided up into 39 categories. And one of the ramifications is that if you also, let's say, one category is writing, and one category is and one category is plowing. So let's say on the same Shabbat, you forgot it was Shabbat, you wake up, I don't know, you were drunk, whatever, you wake up and you write down your dream. And then you go to work. You go out to your field and you start to plant your flowers or your vegetables. And then you wake up and you say, uh-oh, today was Shabbat. So you have to go to the temple, bring 2 sacrifices. One for the category of writing and one for the category of plowing. So that's the concept of categories, that it divides up the different melachot. So maybe for each Shabbat that you violated, let's say you're about Tshuva and you're never careful about the laws of Shabbat, and then you start learning about the laws of Shabbat, I realize, okay, I'm 30 years old, and I didn't keep Shabbat 52 Shabbatot a year, and on each Shabbat, I probably did all 39 categories of work, because I went to work, and I wrote things, and I plowed, and whatever. 39 times 52 for each year. Wow, that's a lot of animals that you're going to have to bring, right? So there's the whole discussion in the Talmud about what to do with somebody who didn't know. Is it all going to be counted as one violation or many violations? But the point is for us to understand what we're supposed to be careful about, not to think about, all of our debts. We do tshuva nowadays. We have Yom Kippur. And we do the confession, and we believe that Hashem told us that Yom Kippur is bringing us atonement for our sins, even though we don't have a sacrifice and we don't have the temple. Okay, so basically there's one prohibition, positive and negative, not to do work. But then read the last paragraph on page 139, Yosef.
Although it is a mitzvah to desist from all melacha, the Torah mentions 4 melachot explicitly: choresh, koser, ma'avir, and chotza.
We'll learn what they are soon. Go ahead.
Choresh and koser are mentioned in Shemot 34:21. For 6 days, for 6 days work, but on the 7th day cease. At the plowing, charish, and the reaping, chatzir, cease. This teaches that even activities upon which human life depends, through which men produce food, are forbidden on Shabbat.
That's a nice idea. I never thought of that. Why the Torah says explicitly these two, regarding plowing and reaping. These are basics, and still that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Go ahead.
Kindling a fire is also mentioned explicitly. You shall kindle no fire, throughout your settlements on Shabbat. Shemot 35. The sages state that this melacha is singled out. It teaches that one is subject to punishment for each individual melacha he performs on Shabbat. Thus, if one performs 2 melachot unintentionally, is obligated to bring 2 sin offerings. Shabbat 17. The melacha of Hotza'ah is mentioned explicitly as well. Let everyone remain where he is. Let no man leave, yet say, his place on the 7th day. Shemot 16:29. Hotza'ah is singled out to make it clear that even though it seems to be an insignificant activity, one merely moves an object but does not change it in any way, it is nevertheless considered a melacha.
Okay, so there is this general prohibition of work. And as I said, we're going to see soon that the sages enumerated there's 39 categories. But out of those 39 categories, 4 are actually mentioned by the Chumash explicitly. Charisha, Ktsira, lighting a fire, Mavir, and Hotza'ah, taking things in and out from the house, carrying them to a different domain. We're going to learn the details of all of these, but it is fascinating that some are mentioned explicitly, what exactly melacha is, but others were left for the sages to define for us, to teach us exactly what the rest of the 39 categories are. We're going to have to stop here. B'ezrat Hashem, we introduced the topic. We're going to learn more about melachot in the coming days. B'ezrat Hashem. Have a good day.